extinguisher during the hours-long attack. They beat a Capitol Police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
Qualified it.
Officer.
He was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher. Sicknick bravely pushes back the crowd, but the crowd overwhelms him. There's so many of them. They're all over him. They're all around him. And he's holding back. And he gets hit. He falls to the ground. And as he looks up, he sees the American flag. And he hears, "Trump, Trump, Trump," as Trump supporters bash his head with a fire extinguisher. That's basically what we were told happened with Sicknick. Brian Sicknick, Officer Brian Sicknick, the Capitol Hill officer that basically died. We initially were told that he was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher. His head was bashed in with a fire extinguisher. That's uber specific. And that's what we were told happened. And it wasn't just the out there outlets that said that's what happened. It was outlets like the New York Times. Look at this right here, right here. The circumstances surrounding Mr. Sicknick's death are not immediately clear, and Capitol Police only said that he passed away due to injuries sustained while on duty. At some point in the chaos, with the mob rampaging through the halls of Congress while lawmakers were forced to hide under their desks, he was struck with a fire extinguisher, according to 2 law enforcement officials. He returned to his division and collapsed, said Capitol Police. In a statement, he was taken to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. That sounds like he was bashed in the head with a fire extinguisher. He goes to the hospital and he dies, meaning it makes it appear as if during the riot, he gets beat up by Trump supporters, gets to the hospital, they're working on his body, and they can't bring him back, he dies. But that's not what happened. Meaning, to start off and say the circumstances was unclear. Okay, fair enough. But then you go from unclear to uber specific. Unclear, but bashed in the head with a fire extinguisher, dies in the hospital. That's not true. And the fact is, they didn't have like underlying elements in order to kind of confirm this. There was no videotape, clearly, because it didn't necessarily happen. And I'm unclear on entirely how they got that uber specific story. Here's the other part. This is ProPublica, just so you can see what actual reporting looked like in this moment. Right here. They said Sicknick texted them Wednesday night to say that while he had been pepper sprayed, he was in good spirits. The text arrived hours after the mob assault on Capitol had left more than 50 officers injured and 5 dead. He texted me last night and said, "I got pepper sprayed twice. He was in good shape," said Ken Sicknick, brother, as they drove towards Washington. Apparently, he collapsed in the Capitol, and they resuscitated him using CPR. Now, they were talking to the family. And the Sicknick family issued their own press release Friday, urging the public and reporters not to politicize Sicknick's death. "Please honor Brian's life and service and respect our privacy while we move forward in doing the same. Brian is a hero. That is what we would like people to remember." All right. I want you to notice something. The date on the New York Times, right here, it is January 8th, 2021, 9:17 in the morning. The date on ProPublica piece, January 8th, same day, 4:37 in the evening. Now, the New York Times had went with the fire extinguisher. The ProPublica did not. And the ProPublica even went further on the same day and made the point of the family saying, "Please don't politicize this." Right here. And right here. This even goes further. I love this. Last, while they had heard that Sicknick was in critical condition on the ventilator, according to family members who spoke to ProPublica, while some news reports had said that an unnamed officer was in critical condition after being bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher, family members did not have details of his injuries. They said he texted them on Wednesday to say that he had been pepper sprayed. Meaning, the great lady, the New York Times, gets it dramatically wrong when ProPublica, apparently, in the most basic of news, like calling, talking to family members, getting the lowdown, and then just presents it. And it wasn't just the New York Times that they got it wrong. I showed you all of the mainstream media networks talking about it over and over again. Bludgeoned, bludgeoned, bludgeoned. Now, let's be clear. There's a difference between, let's say, a commentator that may get something wrong and versus a New York Times or a Washington Post or one of these other outlets that is supposed to do news. CNN's job is news. The New York Times' job is news. That's their job. Opinion, yes, but news is the main thing. And this story was put out there. The question is why. And that question is obvious. Whether it was intentional of a lie, like they're throwing chairs, or whether they were incentivized for this lie. The media hates Trump's guts. And the fact that somebody died as a result of Trump supporters raiding the Capitol, that was a Christmas gift. The fact that he was beaten in the head with a fire extinguisher made it all the better. And as grim as that sounds, if you don't like Trump, if you hate Trump, if you believe Trump should be impeached, if you think what took place at that Capitol was atrocious, if you think what took place over the last 3-4 years with Trump in office was a disaster, and you see that, and the media had already been jumping on the bandwagon of truth not necessarily mattering as long as you can go after Donald Trump, yeah, I think they were incentivized to drop all notion of context and all notion of honest reporting and trying to figure out what's true and what's not. And so that story coasts for the longest time. And not just coasts, the story even changes, it transforms. It becomes, when it becomes obvious that it wasn't a situation where he had died from that, it changed into dying from bear spray. The reality of it is this. So stark, so clear, that they had to just put it in the most bluntest of terms in the header. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes. Died of natural causes.
Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He died of natural causes. That's what happened.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brown.
No, they did not. He died of natural causes. I don't know why these people keep saying that.
Died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
And again, he was not. He died of natural causes, 2 strokes. Apparently, he had a blood clot in the base of his skull that took his life. And again, ProPublica had just talked to the family on the same day that the New York Times came out with their story. Dave McSwain. ProPublica is not considered a standard, like in a great lady, but on this, and not just this, to be honest, ProPublica does really good reporting in general. I use their stuff all the time. But in this, the fact that they get it right and New York Times gets it wrong shows a certain level of reasonable standard that the New York Times has utterly and entirely failed to meet. I mean, right here, if I can pull it up. They just called the family. They just called the family. This wasn't any, like, breakthrough reporting where we're digging through the garbage. On the exact same day that the New York Times put out the story that he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher, ProPublica goes in and explains what happens because they talk and spoke to the family. And the family even goes further and said, please don't politicize this. After this lie fell apart, they still wanted to stick it on Trump. And they were looking for any measure, any way they could put it on Trump. The fire extinguisher bludgeoning is horrible. And so that, of course, is exactly what they want to do. But they couldn't do that anymore. So what they had was he was sprayed with something. And the spraying him with something gave him this allergic reaction that ends up killing him. So even though he wasn't bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher, the bear spray did the exact same thing by taking his life away with the allergic reaction. Do you remember that? That was the follow-up lie. The people who were pushing back and saying, how do you know that? Now, I wasn't one of those people. I was one of the people that saw the New York Times article and was like, okay, he got bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher. And I got to be honest, media and the perspective of people on mainstream media has gotten to the point where they believe that media is lying a lot. And I would point out that that rise of Alex Jones and the rise of the QAnons and everything else is because people feel it. They know it. That media is giving them either a biased perspective that is dropping the context or just bluntly lying. And in the case of the Trump stuff, especially during the Trump era, they didn't seem to all that much care between the difference of an opinion versus what they would consider to be actual reporting. And the culmination of that is a public that gets disenchanted with the information that's being presented, whereas the public is unclear on what's fake news versus what's not. And yet the public knows that the media is often not telling them the whole story or not being honest. They were incentivized to do exactly what they did here because of their hatred of Trump. And this has been the pattern that has been taking place over the last 3 years. And to make it so bad or to make it worse, when they fail on it, they just get up and walk off like nothing just happened. So you would have the Russian bounty story that they howl about for weeks. And then they're told, yeah, that's not true. That's fake news. And there's no repudiation of themselves. They would say, well, we just follow what we were told. Yes, but is that your job? Doesn't your job as a journalist go beyond stenography? And if it is just stenography, then just call yourself stenographers. Hell, you can call yourself glorified stenographers. I don't care what you call yourselves, but don't call yourself journalists if you can't necessarily question that. My show, the show, Fault Lines, all that stuff, our job on some level is poking questions at the things that take place. And you would think that when they're talking to Psaki, when they're talking to Biden, when they're interviewing the various members, that will be something that will come up. Not so much. Stenographers. And stenographers that don't castigate the previous actions, don't even recognize the fact that they lied per se, at least not typically, and they move on. The Iraq War, massive failure. The Syria chemical weapon strikes, massive failure. And that one is such a massive failure that when the leaks came out from the OPCW challenging the results and showing that the people who were on the ground was challenging the results that they came up with in the final dodgy report, the mainstream media reports the first dodged up chlorine issue. They don't mention the second part that showed the first report was dodgy, bogus, and politically motivated. To have an organization like the OPCW to be used for political ends is a massive, massive deal. And for the media to get the first story and run with it, and then when that story is challenged, credibly challenged, by various people who were in the organization, who were in the OPCW, hell, one of the guys even ran the OPCW, if I'm not mistaken, Bustani, they don't want to acknowledge it, don't even want to mention it, don't want to bring it up at all. It's phenomenal. And so when people see that, they're lying. They're lying. They're lying to me. And when they're lying to me, how do I know what's true and what's not? In this very specific case, this was one of those things that wasn't true. And I don't believe for a moment that when they conjured this up, that this incentive structure that was built into it disincentivized them from wanting to know or even caring about whether or not it was ultimately true. When I ran the story originally, within a few days, I came back and augmented what was being said based on the reporting when he realized that the guy didn't necessarily die in the way that they were saying he died. I don't follow this path, meaning I accept that I can get it wrong on some of the stories. I think my biggest gripe with the way media runs this stuff, though, and I think maybe the one that I do excel at, is A, capacity to engage it, B, the majority of the time questioning what's being relayed and what's being said, and even trying to have more contextual understandings in the way that this stuff is talked about. Media doesn't do context like talking about. And from the standpoint of just repeating it, these guys just wanted to go after Trump. I don't believe for a moment that they engaged the story trying to find the reality of it. They told this lie and they repeated this lie over and over and over and over again. And now the stark reality, pages of the Washington Post. The Capitol Police officer Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes. Right here. The ruling, released Monday, will make the district's chief medical examiner is the one who's proclaiming this. The ruling released Monday will make it difficult for prosecutors to pursue homicidal charges in officer's death. 2 men are accused of assaulting Sicknick by spraying a powerful chemical irritant at him during a siege, but prosecutors have not tied that exposure to Sicknick's death. And like I said, that was the second story that came out, that Sicknick was sprayed with bear spray, and that the bear spray had some kind of allergic reaction that basically ended up taking his life. Not so much. Is it likely that the stress of that day aggravated whatever was going on? Yes, it could have contributed to the stroke later on. That is true. Can you tie as a 1-to-1? I think they're going to have a hard time tying that 1-to-1. No fire extinguisher. He was pepper sprayed, apparently, at least by his own assessment. But that's not, apparently, the cause of death. My point is they've been getting it wrong for what, months now? For months? I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Oh, Tim Moss, thank you. And by the way, the Chauvin verdict is apparently coming up within the next, 30 minutes or so. And I'm going to cover that as it comes out. So, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. Yes, Rosa.